This is your SPSS Basics 5th edition, Chapter 1, PowerPoint. The lecture will consist of going back over some of the level of measurements that we have discussed previously. So looking at our levels of measurement in research, the first thing that we want to do is consider what is research. Well, according to our text, research is the process of systematically collecting, analyzing, and interpreting information. And the information that we collect is called data. Previously, in making sense of statistics, we also talked about this as researchers collect data using a variety of tools. They might use achievement testing, they might use personality testing, such as the Myers-Briggs, they might use direct observation. Clearly, you can see that the student teacher is observing the classroom via a one-way mirror, or we may conduct interviews, focus groups, and these interviews can be formalized or semi-formalized interviews. The important thing is that our data collection is systematic. And that when we talk about systematic, what we mean is we have to plan. So we have to, as researchers, plan what to observe, whom to observe, when to observe, how to observe, and how to analyze the data. We've covered this in previous sections, but let's go over it one more time. We're talking about what to observe. So, in your textbook, one of the examples is that we're going to observe self-esteem. And then we also talk about whom are we going to observe. So we're going to observe self-esteem in low achieving students. Then we have a time frame of when we are going to observe these low achieving students. We're going to observe them near the end of their 6th grade year. Now we're also going to talk about how to observe. So what we are looking at, how did we observe? We actually had and used a previously validated self-esteem scale. So that is how we observe. And then how to analyze the data. What we would be looking at in this would be calculating a mean using our SPSS. Then we talk about how we analyze our data using a wide variety of statistical methods. Now, one of the important concepts within this is the statistical methods used depend on whether the characteristics of the data, so the most important thing being the level of measurement, and again, the purpose of the research. So two things that we look at initially for analyzing the data using statistics, we look at the purpose of the research and the characteristics of the data or its level of measurement. Now also when we are interpreting the data that we collect, we are looking at the data strength and the weaknesses of the data. And this is extremely important because as we are looking at the strengths and weaknesses, we will have to, within our interpretation, discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the data. The strengths may be that we used, as we said, a validated self-esteem scale. One of our weaknesses might be that we only were able to observe lowest achieving students at one particular school, and thus it might not be generalizable to the greater population. But as researchers, we have to include these strengths and weaknesses within our information. Now let's look at our traditional levels of measurement, and we've been over this before, so this is going to be a very quick review. We're looking at nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio as the levels of measurement, noted as traditional levels of measurement. And remember, when we talk about nominal, we're talking about categorical data. And this is about the naming, so we're using names or words instead of numbers. Again, some of the examples that we've used is using the name of the political party with what is affiliated as far as how they identify themselves from a political standpoint. This is considered a name. So you're either a member of the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Communist Party of America, or as a lot of people look at, the Republicans or the Democrats. We also could use the concept of male and female of naming our gender as a nominal or categorical level of measurement. Again, remember with nominal, these are categories that participants name that there is no particular order. So the categories are not in order. There's no basis for higher or lower. It is simply a name. Now let's look at ordinal, which is the second level of measurement. Now this places participants in rank order from high to low, but we don't talk about how much higher or lower one participant is spaced from another participant. So an example would be tallest to shortest. So we have the tallest person at number 1 and the shortest at number 4. The thing is that with this being ordinal, what we're doing is we're just saying tallest to shortest. We're not saying that participant number 1 is 6 foot tall and participant number 4 is 5 foot tall, and therefore then we're going in order from a number. This is just simply saying that we're ranking you from tallest to shortest. That means participant 1 could be 6 foot and participant number 2 might be 5'11" and a half. He's still shorter than participant number 1, but we're not saying how much shorter. So if I ask you what is your favorite subject, one of the things that you might say is you're going to say history is number 1, English is number 2, maybe science is number 3, and math is number 4. Notice that I'm not saying how much you like one or the other more. I'm just asking you to rank which one you have as your favorite from 1 to 4. So remember, within ordinal, what we're saying is measurement indicates the relative standing of the participants, but it does not indicate the amount of difference among height. So we're just saying again, to remind you, in Ordinal, we're ranking you in order from high to low, or we could actually do low to high, but we're not saying how much higher or lower one participant is from the other. Now let's look at interval and ratio. So within interval and ratio levels of measurement, we know that both have equal intervals. They're usually analyzed in the same way, but only ratio has an absolute 0. So again, in looking at our height from highest to lowest. Now, in interval and ratio, we would actually indicate the height of participants to the nearest inch or half an inch. It just simply depends on how we state the interval and measurement. Now, one of the things is, so we have the tallest, would be 5'8" and we might say the second tallest or the next one in line is 5'6". And when we're talking about interval and ratio also, remember that we're saying we're using equal intervals. So the difference between 3 and 4 inches is the same as the difference between 5 and 6 inches. Equal intervals. Additional information that we're talking about within interval and ratio is we're analyzing these two in the same way in most statistical analysis, but we have different scientific differences. Interval does not have an absolute 0, where a racial scale has an absolute 0. So as a measurement on a tape measure, we know where the 0 point is on the tape measure. So here with an interval scale, there is no absolute 0. And I like to use the concept of the Stanford-Binet intelligence test. So there is no absolute 0. All we're saying is there is a level of from genius to, and these are clearly not PC, politically correct terms anymore. However, when we can talk about having a deficiency from the standpoint of 70 to 79. If you notice on the scale, though, there is no 0. It just simply notes that it's below 20. Within our SPSS levels of measurement, we really only have two. We have categorical, which is where we have collapsed nominal and ordinal into the categorical level of measurement in SPSS. And then looking at the scale level, what we would do is that we have collapsed the interval and ratio into a scale level of measurement in SPSS. One of the reasons why I really like this particular text is that it has this chart where it really discusses with you the traditional and the SPSS terminology for levels of measurement. So this is a really good way of looking at it. And if you notice, we're also saying that our scale is a continuous scale. And this is important when you are coding your data, and you'll see that later as we move through SPSS. Let's also remind ourselves when we're talking about variables in SPSS, and variables are a trait or characteristic that varies among the participants in a study. And again, we understand what this means. We might talk about gender, we might talk about race, We might talk about also their difference in answers in a survey question. So these variables, these are traits or characteristics that vary among the participants in the study.